favorites, welcome to my channel. What am I doing today? Today we are looking at the Sakura traditional Chinese painting colors. Now these are 12 millimeters, 24 tubes of traditional Chinese paint, and we're going to talk all about this and how this connects into my deep dive of gouache. Okay, so going into my deep dive of gouache, believe it or not, there were several things that came up. One of the things that came up was opaque watercolors. The second thing that came up was acrylic gouache. And the reason why, first of all, opaque watercolors came up is because gouache, as I have countlessly said, is usually called opaque watercolors. And when I went into that rabbit hole of opaque watercolors, I discovered that true opaque watercolors is a bit different than traditional gouache. And let me explain. Because traditional gouache, the pigments are not grounded as finely. So the pigments for traditional gouache is much bigger or chunkier in its processing versus opaque watercolors, which are watercolors are traditionally watercolors on a whole, watercolor paints, watercolor, whether it's in tube form or pan form, they're on a whole grounded finely. Now opaque watercolors actually refer to the process of grinding, where they are grinding finely, but stuff are added to it, whether it is chalk, white pigments, or different supplements, I think, or agents to bring up the color. Also, some of them are not grounded as finely as other watercolor companies. Like for instance, the Chinese and Japanese tend to not ground their watercolor paints as finely as maybe the Europeans, like the Schmincas, the Winsor Newton, the Sennelier. Those products tend to be grounded more finely. Like I said, when I went down the rabbit hole of doing a month of the gouache, El Mes del Gouache series, I actually went down that rabbit hole and explored everything gouache, whether it was opaque watercolors or not. The second thing that I discovered was the gouache acrylic, which is actually called gouache acrylic or acrylic gouache, but is actually more acrylic than gouache. And when we get to that, then we are going to explore that too, because that too is incorporated in the month of the gouache. Now, as I was going through my entire review and my overview of month of the gouache, I discovered it's going to probably be a year of the gouache, more like a month of the gouache, just because there's so much products that I want to go through, and there's also so much things that I want to discuss, that I think dedicating one full month to it is going to be a bit overbearing. So I might need to stretch this out throughout the course of the year, and maybe sporadically dedicate 1 month to something. And so for this month, we're going to be looking at opaque watercolors, just because I've been through most of the opaque watercolors before, and I can bring that to you, and then we can go into traditional gouache, and then we can go into gouache acrylics. But it's going to be a lot. Okay, so after that long introduction, we're going to be bringing to you the Sakura traditional Chinese painting colors. Now the Sakura traditional Chinese painting set is actually made in Shanghai, China, by a joint effort of the Japanese joint venture for Chinese painting. Now, like I said, the process that the Japanese take in making their watercolors is the grounding process. How we use the mule to ground the pigments into the binder. The process of that is a bit different than the Europeans does it, where the Europeans does it ground the pigment powder more softly. And I'm talking a lot about pigment powders, and I'm not even showing you what I'm talking about. Okay, what I have here is a cup of one of my pigment powder that I use to make watercolor paints with, and I don't seem to know how to open it. Yeah, right here. Let's be careful with this. Now, as you can see, let me grab a scoop here. how these powders look. They're kind of chunky, and like I said, the grounding process for this, the Chinese and Japanese will not ground this very finely. Okay, so it will not be very fine powder like what is left on the spoon here. They're gonna ground it to make it be a little bit more opaque. Now this color is golden ochre, which is traditionally an already opaque pigment, whereas the Europeans will ground this very finely till it's a fine, thin powder dust. Okay, and this pigment powder here, I think this one is summer yellow. This one is also pigment powder, but this one is made from dye. So rather like this one, which is actually made from minerals or stones, this is the golden ochre PY43. This is actually pure pigment. This one is a dye pigment here. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about pigment powders and opaque watercolors. I'm actually talking, and you can see it gets everywhere because the box is already messed up with golden ochre powder. This is what I'm talking about. How the grounding process. So whereas Europeans will ground it finely into a very sleet powder dust, Japanese, Chinese traditionally will still ground it fine, but not as fine as the Europeans. And for gouache, they will leave it very chunky. So therefore, these Sakura are made from pigments. Okay, and the colors are, the binder that they use is artificially made. Now traditionally, the Chinese, Japanese form of watercolors, they don't use the gum arabic that the European brands mostly use. Chinese, Japanese traditional watercolor painting usually use an animal binding agent. I think it's usually made with animal fat or something, you know, the fat part of the animal's skin. But this one is made from an artificial glue, not the animal fat, and they have outstanding preservation, permanent, light fast, and water resistant when dry. And this is where the comparison to gouache comes in, because the pigments are thicker. They tend to be more opaque than traditional watercolor. They're not as transparent as European watercolors. And for this one, it says that it's water resistant when dry, kind of like gouache acrylic. And it can be used on rice paper, mulberry paper, hemp paper, watercolor paper, and canvas. And I think that lends itself to the fact that it is an opaque watercolor, and it isn't a opaque watercolor in tubes. Now this set here comes, the Sakura traditional Chinese painting colors actually comes in only 2 presentations, the 12 set and the 24 set. I was graciously and generously gifted a pre-owned 24 set of the Sakura traditional Chinese by my girl over at a phenomenal phenomenal art. I will be linking her channel in this description below, so you guys can go and check her out. I actually asked her for dot samples of this card because I wanted to compare opaque watercolors to gouache, and she amazingly sent me a generous sample, literally half tubes of all this, and she had the full 24 set. So this is really good. This is a long video. I'm thinking of splitting this into 2 because I actually started off talking about something that did not relate to this product, but opaque watercolors on a hold. And you know what, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna end this here, and then we're gonna do a deep dive. No, I'm not gonna end this here. And then we're gonna be looking into this when I come back. Okay, so another traditional Chinese Japanese watercolor set that I know of is actually the Gamzai Tambi Kuretake Gamzai Tambi set. This I have here is the 24 colors. I think this come in a max count of 52, but I have the 24 color set here. And unlike the Sakura, these are actually panned presentation of the Chinese Japanese opaque watercolors. And again, we will be talking about these in this in-depth review of gouache, but I'm not going to go into that whole Chinese Japanese opaque watercolors presentation. Whereas the Kuretake is Japanese, I believe the Sakura is actually also Japanese, but this one is made in China, and I think it's made for the traditional Chinese market. So this one is a bit different than this, and we're going to be exploring that too in this entire deep dive into gouache series. Okay, so the Sakura traditional Chinese color paint set is actually written all in Chinese. And my girl over at A Phenomenal Creative Art was amazing enough to translate the colors for me. Unfortunately, these don't tell you pigment information because I try to read the tubes and it doesn't tell you what pigment they're made from. Does tell you they're bright and nice though. Yeah, that's what they tell you. It's bright and nice, but it doesn't tell you about what pigment they're made from. It comes with 24 beautiful colors, which includes titanium white, gamboge. She has already did this work for me. Thank you very much, girl. Mineral yellow, mineral golden yellow, ochre, brown ochre. I wonder if this is different from my one that I have here. Cinnabar, vermilion, bright red, Eason, dark red, rogue, purple, emerald green, malachite, green number malachite, green number 1, malachite green number 3, azurite blue number 3, azurite blue number 1, china blue, ultramarine, phthalo cyan blue, indigo, black, and a gold. And I actually, when I reorganized it, I actually reorganized it in the colors suggested on their color chart here. So this is how it looks here, but of course we're going to be swatching these out and see how they look on the papers that I'm going to use. Of course, what I did is I panned them, or basically took a few of them out, put them into a styrofoam tray and put them to dry for about 9 days and cover them so that not much dust get on them. And as you can see, they have lifted from the styrofoam and they're moving. And so we're going to also be swatching them out both in tubes and dry to see if there's any shift in opaqueness or colors when you swatch from dry or tubes. But as you can see, when they dry, they do crack because you can see them moving about the styrofoam. Now let's look at the individual tubes. I'm gonna grab gamboge because I like saying that word. Now the tubes are actually metal, but the label is actually paper. Has the name on it, Sakura. It has the name of the color on it. I think this is gamboge. I forgot what these are. Okay, it has the number here. QBT 1750, that's the number code. I realized that in the Japanese Chinese market, they love to use numbers a lot to identify products, place, things. And so it's not unlikely for them to have numbers, naming paints after numbers rather than, you know, how Europeans traditionally name things after names. Okay, 12 mLs, and everything else is in Chinese writing, and I forgot to ask my friend to translate this for me, so sorry. But yeah, but I'm thinking it says traditional Chinese paints. Okay, barcode, not much else, and being that these were pre-owned, they're already opened. There we go, see how beautifully it looks. So they're still very much juicy inside. And they're much all like this. All of them have the color indicator to kind of indicate to some hints to what the colors are. But of course, the colors might be a little different because this color, number 17, is telling me it's a dark brown. But to me, it doesn't look dark brown at all. It kind of looks more like a rusty green swatch here. And this is the color, so it's completely different. So we do have to swatch these out to see what the true color is, and I will be doing that in time lapse because this is 24 colors, and if I do it like I did the other two, well, the previous videos. It will take some while, so we're gonna be doing that in time-lapse fashion. Okay, that was, gosh, that was over an hour. What have I learned? What I've learned is that these don't pan well. They don't. As you can see, let me grab my tool here. As you can see here, I haven't numbered them yet. I haven't labeled them yet. I'll wait for it to completely dry, and then I'm going to go in there and label all of them. It doesn't pan well. I was getting so much difficulty in trying to literally pick up paint from from the dry swatches or the dot cards that I made. Literally a lot of trouble. And it's not like it was the paper's fault, because like I said, I use styrofoam, plastic styrofoam. So basically the paint should have just should have absorbed into the material, and it did not. It should have just dried on top, and I would expect it to have some movement to it. What I didn't expect was it to break. Literally, some just basically shattered into pieces, and not to get any color from them. There was only like 3 of them that was really good at re-wetting after being dried, and that would have been this color, a blue, and I believe a red. This one, I think this is dark brown. No, let me get the pen, the label here. Yeah, this one was the 5th one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one here, the ochre. I could have re-wet that. This one here, which was the phthalo, this was the phthalo cyan blue, was okay. And this one here, which I believe was the bright red. Yeah, the bright red was okay. Maybe the gamboge, but I wouldn't hang my hat on that. It was difficult to re-wet after you had put them to dried. And the brush I'm using is actually a very stiff brush. I'm not using a very soft brush. I'm actually using, this is from Pointer. This is one of the Pointers multi-purpose brush that I got right here in my country, I believe. And the bristles, as you can see, are fairly stiff. They're fairly stiff bristles. They're not really soft at all, you know, so it's nylon bristles, but it's fairly stiff. So you should be able to pick up color from them with not really scratching the brush into the paint. And for some of them, I literally had to scratch the brush into the paint to try to pick up some semblance color. The gold, there was no color coming off that whatsoever. It's like when that dried like a rock. That and white, you can see those two colors. There was nothing coming off those dried like a rock. And so I wanted to bring that to you. So the best way I can see myself working with these paint is to work with them directly from the tubes. Now I'm gonna put this aside. I'm gonna be doing some exercises with them, and then after I finish that exercise, I'm gonna bring a paint review to you. I like to work with paints before I actually complete my review process, and I want to be able to show you guys not only how it's swatched but also how it paint. And I don't want to do my first painting on camera because I really want to have time to meditate on the paint and to see what those paints are all about. I actually have a separate book that I work in for these to bring that review process to you, and let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm giving you guys a sneak peek here into my process. First, I use this book is made from Fabriano hot press 25% cotton. Actually, it's the Fabriano Studio line, so it's the more student friendly line, or the cost effective line for the Fabriano brand, and it's hot press paper. It's 25% cotton, and this is basically what I'm using versus the paper that I'm swatching on, which is, I think this is the Derwent Academy 190 pound weight paper. I love swatching on this paper because it's, as you can see, it's an off-white kind of paper. So you can really bring out those whites or those lighter colors on it versus this paper, which is kind of fairly white to me. And this is the Della Rowney. I'm giving you a little sneak peek here into not only what is coming up, but to illustrate my process. So what I normally do is I normally do a complementary mixing test, and the Della Rowney fortunately came with the 3 primaries, a portrait color and a black and a white. So what I did with this was I tried to see how I could mix them to see the range of the primary colors in here, only the primaries, not the entire range for the entire set. So like this one that comes with 24 colors, I am not going to use the full color, the full range to do a mixing chart with. I'm only going to use the split primaries, which I'll use a warm yellow, a cool yellow, a warm red, a cool red, a warm blue, and a cool blue. And I'm going to use its white. The next thing that I do is this, which I try to see their consistency. Now the Della Rowney is actually the Della Rowney Aquafine Gouache, so this is a gouache set, and I try to see its consistency. So I'm looking at 4 consistency here: yogurt, milk, coffee, tea, and this is where I dilute it with water. So yogurt has the least amount of water, a little bit more water, a little bit more water to much more water, and to try to see how you can dilute it with water. The third test that I do is to try to do the white mixing test, and that's the reason white is not included here in its color mixing chart, because white is here. And I try to add more white, less white. It goes less white, more white, more white, most white. And I try to add white throughout the entire process to see how far I could dilute it or whiten it before it becomes basically disappeared. And the third one I did, this is what I wanted to do one, but I said I'm not going to do a neutralizing test anymore, because this is basically the same thing I'll do if I do a illustration. So I have an illustration here, and all of them have this where I do an illustration and I paint it, and I tried, and all of them use bears. Because I'm trying to make browns, because I'm only using the primary set from that and maybe other colors that comes with it, to see how I could paint with these paints and to see the consistency I can use, the brush strokes I can use. And when I'm talking about consistency, I'm talking about the water to paint mixture, because when you're working with gouache and especially opaque watercolors, and this is something I should discuss, is that I find that there is a sweetening or a sweet spot for an artist when it comes to your water to paint mixture, because you do have to add a little bit of water to the gouache so you can have that smoothness or that workability of the paint. Now each artist have their own sweetness, how there's our own sweet spot. Some artists like to work with gouache primarily very, very thick, while some like to dilute it a little bit more towards the yogurt milk consistency instead of the paste yogurt consistency. So there's a sweet spot for every artist, and everybody has their own individual sweet spot. And this is why I do these tests, is to try to figure out where my individual sweet spot is and how I could work with these paints. Now, having said all of that, I should say swatching alone can help you to find what your sweet spot is. But sometimes after you finish swatching, you really do have to work with the paints first. You really do have to do an illustration in your style, using the colors you prefer, to see how you can best maneuver around these paints. That's what I'm going to do off camera. I'm going to take some time out to do that exact exercise, so that when I do bring that paint review to you, which is not going to probably be a beer, I don't know what picture I'm going to paint, but just to show you, do a full review with these paints. And having said that, this is going to be a very long video. I dare say this might be the first one that I post, even though I've already recorded some videos already. This might be the first one I post, because there's a lot of explaining in this video, and I really want all of my friends to know where I'm coming from and what I'm doing. And with all that said, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. This is a journey we're taking. We're doing this deep dive together. We're seeing what gouache is all about, comparing it to opaque watercolors, comparing it to gouache acrylics, comparing it to gouache itself, and what's the difference. I did not get every single gouache in the world. But I think I got a good mixture enough to make a fair comparison. And with all that said, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Continue to be with me in this journey as we discover things together in this deep dive into gouache. And as usual, stay safe, stay blessed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.